Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm full of book reviews and other sci-fi and fantasy content. And today we have a new mic. I don't know if you've noticed. Let's see how this goes. Tell me, do you prefer this audio or the previous audio? I am trialing new things because there's always some issues going on with the audio, so trying to solve it. But let's get into the actual review today that we're doing, and you can probably see which one it is because we're reviewing Vala by John Gwynne, which is the second book of the Faithful and the Fallen series. But of course, if you're new, don't forget subscribe, like the content, and comment away if you've read this series or not, or other series that are similar to this and you're keen to recommend. Comment down below. So as we say, we are back into a familiar world. This is the second book of 4 in the series The Faithful and the Fallen. I've reviewed the first one, which is called Malice. You can check it out with this thumbnail or the cards that are pointing somewhere, and you'll basically receive what I think about the first book, which I think it was quite a good book, and that will prime you to see what I think about this book. Of course, if you've read the first one and the second one and you just want to know, then there's no point in seeing, but go see it just to increase the views and everything, because why not help me? For the ones that don't know, this is an epic fantasy novel. It's full of Nordic inspiration, so think of Vikings and giant worms and giants, all that kind of things related to Nordic mythology without the Nordic gods. Vala was published initially in 2014. It was nominated for the David Gemmell Award. Unfortunately, it did not win. However, the first one in this series, Malice, won this award. So as you can see, this book has been acclaimed by many, the first one especially, and the second one was nominated. So it does say that it has some quality. And I mean, you can see this on Goodreads, because on Goodreads, this book has over 29,000 ratings, and the average score is a 4.43, which is quite high, especially for a second book. Usually second books tend to decrease a tiny bit due to middle book syndrome, and a lot of people that don't like the first one tend to not stop going or read the second one and still not like it. So there's that. But I mean, this book is even better than the first one. So for the ones that are new here, I'm going to read the synopsis first before going into the actual review. If you don't want to listen to it, just skip to this timestamp that is floating around. But otherwise, you can sit around, listen. Of course, there might be some spoilers about the first book, so beware. But otherwise, yeah, stick around and let's see. Corbin flees his homeland searching for peace, but he soon discovers that there is no haven in the west, as the agents of Rin and roaming bands of giants hound his every step. Varadis leaves the battleground and rushes to his king's side, but he has witnessed both combat and betrayal, and his duty weighs heavily upon him. Macrin seeks only revenge, but pirate slavers and the brutal world of pit fighting stands in his way. Nathair becomes embroiled in the wars of the West as Queen Rin marches against King Owen. The need to find the cauldron of the giants drives him on. Sides are chosen and oaths will be fulfilled, or broken in a land where hell has broken loose. Alrighty, with the synopsis out of the way, let's just focus on the scores I gave for the first book and the categories within it. And as you can see, it is a good, promising book. It had a 4.2 out of 5 for the first one. There were some iffy bits regarding the writing style and the amount of characters introduced at the start that I did not enjoy that much, and I even released a short about it. But the plot and the characters themselves were quite good, and I truly enjoyed that part, even though there were a lot of characters at the start. So I think it was very promising. There were some parts that I don't think will be as bad in this one. So let's see how it goes. Starting with plot, we follow mostly the same POVs as in the first book, which is good. And the other thing is, this book starts literally minutes after the ending of the first one. It's almost as if you hadn't stopped reading the first one and you just continue. And that's really good because there's nothing to catch up on as you start reading the book, and therefore there's not that loss of momentum. It's almost like you're just keep running through it. I think amongst all the POVs, there were some that had really good plot lines and some that had average plot lines. There weren't any bad ones, which is a good sign, but at the same time, some average ones. One of those examples is Corbin's plot. I mean, I understand that it's a necessary plot line to have, but it's not really one of my favorite plot lines to happen. It was the same thing in Wheel of Time when Rand was refusing to believe he was the Dragon Reborn. That was really something that I don't enjoy, when the Chosen One refuses to be the Chosen One, but I can understand why they need that development stage in their character development. But to compensate, I think there were other POVs like Macquin where they were a lot better than the previous book. I think they had more character development, but also their plot was more interesting. There were more things happening that captured my attention, as opposed to Corbin's plotline, even though in Corbin's plotline a lot of things happen as well. Overall, I don't think the plot suffers that much, but at the same time there aren't any crazy plot twists happening. It's quite balanced, because for the less good ones we have still some good plot lines. So overall, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5 for this category. Now regarding characters, this category will mirror a bit what I just said about plot, because some POVs had great character arcs, whereas others were a bit more stale. And of course, John Gwynne writes his characters quite intermingled with the plot. It's more like the characters are moving the plot along instead of being the plot moving the characters along. So because of that, these two categories become quite intertwined. For me, Macquin was one of the best characters in this book, but then we had other characters like Veradis that were a bit more neutral. And similar to Corbin, I understand what Veradis' path will be, or at least I think I do, because the two books might prove yet surprising. But if Veradis goes the way I think it goes, then I understand why this has to happen, but it was still not enough in this book. He was kind of guided in that direction, but he only moved one step, whereas I expect him to move 5 or 10 steps. And regarding Corbin, again, it was a bittersweet character, because I understand why he needs to go through this arc, but I don't really enjoy that arc. So there's this bittersweet feeling left when I was reading it, where it's okay. But I mean, maybe you like this type of struggle, and therefore for you it won't matter much, and you'll think it's a good arc. So there's that to take into account. One thing that I am yet very curious about is the romance aspect of this series, because John Gwynne started introducing some hints about romance, and in this world it doesn't seem like romance will be integrated very well. So I'm curious on how John Gwynne will do it, and if he'll do it well. I hope he never takes center stage, as in makes the motive for the characters to act, because then I don't think it matches well with the type of story that he is trying to create. But we still have 2 books to see. So for now, for this category, it's going to be a 4 out of 4. No, 4 out of 5, because 4 out of 4 would be 5 out of 5. That's not what I mean. It's 4 out of 5. Moving on to world building, I think this category was one of the ones that remained the most stable. We learn a bit more about the magic in this world, especially about the 7 items created by the use of a fallen star and the old magic. At the same time, one of my wishes / criticisms about the first book was that we get to know more about the giants and their culture and their history, and that was kind of fulfilled, but only superficially. We do get to know a bit more about the giants, but it's mostly about some important giants and about the history of how it led them to be where they are in this story. So it was interesting, there's no doubt about that, but at the same time, it just felt like we were scratching the surface and not really delving deep into it. And the other thing I have to mention is just the world is still feeling a bit empty for me. It feels like there's just this je ne sais quoi missing, like a bit of personality. And it's weird, because in this book we have characters traveling to a lot of parts of this world and exploring new places, and still I felt like they were a bit empty, except for the cities themselves. Maybe it's not epic enough, I'm not really sure, but I will talk a bit more in the next category. For now, this one will be a 4 out of 5. Writing style is our second last category, and this time around I did not have any troubles with the amount of characters introduced at the start, because they were all the same. And not only did this make the pacing a lot better in my head, but because we start the book running from the actions of the ending of the first book, then if I had troubles figuring out what characters were what, I would have immense troubles keeping up right from the start. So I think it was all good. You are able to keep up from the start and follow these characters along, and the pacing of the rest of the book is still good. There are peaks, there are valleys, there are moments where it seems to slow down, I will mention that sometimes this slowing down was borderline boring, but it never really hit the boring. It was just almost there, and then it would pick up into action again. So I think John Green worked the pacing really well. And what I was mentioning about world building is just that it still feels like the world is missing this personality, and I don't know if that is due to the description level of John Gwynn's writing, because John Gwynn writes pretty concisely and directly, and therefore there isn't much flowery in his writing, in his descriptions. He doesn't spend pages describing a room or a scenery. It's just what it is, and therefore I might be missing that part from especially comparing with Wheel of Time, and that might be playing a bit in my head. But for you, if you like that more direct writing, it won't matter and you will actually enjoy it more. But yeah, so aside from that, the fact that the borderline boring, that is just because in a book of 600 pages or more or less, considering I'm reading the paperback edition, there are parts that the characters are just walking along, and yeah, it does feel a bit almost boring, but then it picks up again. So there's that balance to keep up. Hopefully this is because it's more of a second book, so there's still quite a bit of setup without actually climaxing much. And in the next two books, maybe this won't happen because we will be solving a lot of plot lines. But overall, these are very minor things. This category is still a 4 out of 5, and it was very close to a 5. And finally, my last category is enjoyment. I did enjoy this book thoroughly. However, at the same time, I can say that it increased and decreased. It increased because I was no longer confused about who was who, and therefore, from the start, my enjoyment got picked up quite high, and I was really enthusiastic about what we were gonna see in this world. But because some character arcs or plot lines weren't as good, my enjoyment kind of decreased as I was reading them, and we were going through some arcs that I don't enjoy, so there's that balance to keep. But overall, it's still a book full of action and good action. And aside from that, I'm still curious to read the next two books, especially because I've heard that John Gwynn is just a master at ending series. So I think the fourth book will be the one with the highest rating, but let's hope that this one still increases, or the third one still increases from this one. But for now, for enjoyment, it's going to be a 4 out of 5. And so we end this review. Just as a refresher, the scores will show up here together with the first book, but we have 4 for plot, character, world building, writing style, and enjoyment, which gives us a final score of 4 out of 5. So in terms of comparing the first with the second one, there was a slight decrease. I mean, if we look at the categories, some increased, some decreased, but overall the final score decreased just a tiny bit. So for me, it does suffer a bit from middle book syndrome, and that's mostly because we do see the characters going through some predictive or predictable arcs, and even though they are necessary, I think they needed some spice into them. But I bet that in the next few books, this won't happen, and the scores will increase again quite quickly. And I mean, this is just my opinion, because on Goodreads, this book has a high score. So take that into account. Maybe you are more like me and you won't enjoy this book as much, but hopefully the third one will enjoy it a lot more. But let me know what you think if you've read this book. If you haven't, tell me, are you curious to read it? Do you know other series that are like this that I should read? Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I shall be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? All right, see you soon.